And okay, hello everyone. Today we are going to be learning about basic input and output, files and folders. So a basic concept behind programming is that, for example, this is your program. Let's call it program PR, right? This is your program. So program will have inputs. It will perform some functions and some methods on those inputs, and this will give us results or outputs. So this is also sometimes referred to as IO, and IO basically just means input output. So this is the basic fundamental behind each and every program that we're writing when we're using Python. So here we have inputs are a way of uh, accepting information from the user, and the output is the exact opposite. It is a way to provide information back to the user. The input and output both could be used via command line, user interfaces, or files. We will be learning more about command lines and files in this lecture today. So we have already done one example of an output function. So this is the print function right over here. So we've already done this function, and this is an example of an output function because it is helping us display information onto the command line. And in this case, we also call it the console. So the console is a method of both outputting and inputting information. So input via user. Inputs can be accepted from users using input function in Python. The input function stops the execution of code and gives the control of program to user. Excuse me. The user is prompted to enter the data, and once user enters the data, the control returns to the program. So what we're trying to say here is that, excuse me. Oh, excuse me 1 second. Let me just grab. So sorry about that. So let's start over. So we have input via user. So what we're going to be doing with this is we have some input that we require from the user to be put in the console. And we can take that input and we can put that in a variable. And then we can use that variable as we use any other variable in our Python code. So let's jump to PyCharm and see an example of this. Um, there we are. Let me make a new file in here. All right, so we take input from the user. We call it user in. So let's say we want to know the name of a person, right? So we ask them oh, okay, what is your name, right? And then we can give them some space over here so that they can type their answer after this. And we can use our output method called print, which we have used before. To get this. So let's try to run this code. So we get this output. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong file. Let me just. Okay, so let's switch over here. Let me just copy this code. This output is for another piece of code that I was testing. Please ignore that, and let's try to run this again. Oh, can you see my PyCharm? Let me know in
Yes.
chat if.
Yes, Vikas.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For some reason, it tells me that sharing is paused, but we'll power through. So, can you see the output on the screen where it says, "What is your name?" Just type a yes in chat. No. Okay. So let me try to reshare my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Okay. So when we run this piece of code, this is the output we receive, right? So what is your name? And as we can see, there's a cursor here. So let's type in my name over here. So you will see this is in dark green color. This means that this is user input. This is being given by the user after the code is being run. So now when I press enter, it will print it back out for me, which is this line. So let's break this down real quick using annotations to make sure everyone is on the same page. So we have a variable called user in. So when we type this, right, this piece of code gets executed. After this, I wrote my name here. And as soon as I pressed enter, right, as soon as I press enter, this becomes a string and is sent over here. So assume that this is my full name, but uh, it gets transported to this variable user input. And then when we go to line number 2, once we press enter, it goes to line number 2. Then it prints out whatever is in being stored in this variable, which is my name. So that gets printed out back here. So this is how we use the input function in Python. Is everyone clear on how we use the input function, or do we need another example? Okay, so I don't see anything in chat, so we're gonna switch over back to our presentation. All right, so we have input via user, which we already did. So the next thing here is that every input that you give to this, sorry, to this input method, whenever you pass a variable to it, that variable stores a string as the output. Sorry, a string as its data. So when I wrote Akshaan Garg there, it stored that as a string. But even if you provided a number, it will also store that as a string. So for if we want to switch between data types, we have to use is instance to check that the data type in argument 1 is the same as that of argument 2. And if it's not, we can also use the type functionality to find out the type of the class. So let's look at an example over here. User input is input, and then you say enter the number. So in this case, we're entering 50, right? So print is user input data type a string, comma is instance user input, comma string. So we go over here. It says is user data type a string? True. So what we're doing over here is we're checking if user input is of the type that is being supplied in argument 2. Then when we go to the third line, it says print type of data and then type user input. So this gives us the type of it. So class string. So let's try to use some of this in PyCharm. All right. So we have input, and then we give it, let's say int. All right. Okay, so who wants to take a guess about what this will print? Okay, sorry, 1 second. Let me run this code first. And okay, so now when I press enter, what will happen? Anybody wants to take a guess? You can unmute yourself and speak up as well.
Once you enter the value that you entered, it's going
Sorry.
to print out, it's going to confirm first whether it's an integer before it prints it out.
Okay, so will that be true or false?
It will be true.
It will be true. Okay. Any other guesses? It will print 50. So it we're not printing 50, like we're not printing this variable anywhere. We're using it within this function, right? And this function checks is user input an integer or not. So let's try running this code and see what's happened, right? So let's press enter and it says false. So let's see why it says false, right? So as I told you, when we take a variable and we put the data from input into that variable, it gets stored as a string. We never changed this string to an integer, so it is being stored as a string. So let's try to print out what kind of data type it is along with it so we can understand better. So user in is of data type. Then we can use type. Okay, so let's try to run this piece of code again. We do 50. And as we can see, it is of type string. So you can think of it as, you can think that this is basically doing the same thing as this instead of doing this. Is that clear? So it is doing this and not this. Is the idea clear behind why it is giving us a string and not an integer? Okay, so looks like everyone understood that one. Moving on to the next part of the presentation. Okay, so next we have input via files. So input can also be read from files using open function. So these files can be of .txt type, like a normal text file that you make in Notepad. The open function takes two parameters, file name and mode. So file name is the path of the file in the system, along with the file name and its extension. Another way of doing this is you can write only the file name with its extension if it is in the same folder as the file you are executing. I will show you this in a moment. So next up we have mode. So the modes are of four different types. So R for reading the file, return error if file doesn't exist. Then we have A for appending the data into file and create file if doesn't exist. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. We have W for writing into a file and creating file if doesn't exist. And then we have X for creating the file, and if it exists, then it returns an error. We will try to use all four of these, and I will give you examples for that shortly. So let's try to see how we are going to be able to do that first. So we have open, which is the keyword to handle file operations easily. So over here you can see the syntax for it. It says open this. So we have the file name over here and mode over here, right? And we can call this as a variable file object in this scenario, and then do we can put all the lines in that file into a variable. This will be a list of strings where each string is one line in that file. So we do lines equals file obj dot read lines, and then when we print lines it gives us the lines that are inside that file. So let us try to see how this will work in PyCharm. Okay, so we had created this earlier, and over here I had written the same exact scenario as we had on the slides. Let me show you the example.txt file as well. So this is the txt file that we are working with. It has two lines in it with a third empty line as well. And we have just a very simple basic file. And let's try to run this code. And it gives us, it basically gives us a list of, um, I think my sharing is not working again, sorry. Okay, so it gives us this output, which is I am the input file line 1, I am the input file line 2. You will also notice that it has this at the end. That is a backslash followed by an N. So this basically represents the enter key, which means that this is where the sentence ends and the next paragraph started. So this is where it breaks line, basically, as we can see over here. So instead of it, as it can't represent an enter, it writes backslash n. Is everyone clear on how we open the file and we read each line in it? Okay, so I don't see any questions. If there's any questions as they come up, please feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so moving back to our presentation. So the reason we did not use read is because it will read the entire file and return that as a text. So it will make the entire file into one string instead of a list of strings. And this can be very cumbersome if the file is very long, and it is usually better practice to use read lines and put them in lines instead. So input via files, write and append mode. So right now we just use the write method, which was, sorry, read method, which was to read all the files, read all the lines in the file. Next, we're going to be trying to do the append mode. So the append mode will be used to add text to the file. It can be used on an empty file as well. Write mode will add text into existing file and erase everything that was there before. So let's try using the same exact file and add a line to it. So we do a new share to PyCharm. All right. So we can use this with statement as it is and go ahead and add something. So what we're going to do is, sorry, dot write, and then we can put the line in there. So sorry about that. Oh. All right, so let's try running this. Okay, so it tells us we can't write. The reason for this is we didn't change the mode. Okay, so now let's try and see. This line was added into the example.txt file. Is everyone clear on how we got to add a line over here? So let's try to see how write is different. Okay, so we have a doubt in chat. I apologize for my throat. So we write A again. So we're doing append method. So this is what the file looks like if we have nothing in. This is how it originally looked when we had nothing written to the file. So we open this file again, this time with the append method. Excuse me. And then we do file object dot write. So when we do this write function, as we are in append method, it goes to the last line of this file, which is line number 3 in this case, and it simply adds this line of code over there. Oh, sorry, not this line of code. This is a line of text. So it adds this line of text in that file. So when we press run, it doesn't give us any output because there is no, the output in this program is to add a line to this file as we just did. So is it clear now how we reach that? Okay. So next up we have write. So So what will happen if I run this piece of code? I changed the A to a W, which changes the mode from append to write. Does anybody have a guess? You can unmute yourself if you would like. Okay, so there's no guesses. So let's try and run this code and see what happens. As we can see, it completely erased everything in that file and it started over. So when we put it in write mode, what will happen is it will take whatever we write and it will put it in the first line and everything else will be erased in that file. So that is what the W mode does, the write mode. So this is what we were talking about in the PowerPoint presentation where we said write mode will add text into existing file and erase everything which was there before. And append mode will add the text into existing file and won't overwrite anything. It can be used on an empty file as well. So if you have an empty file, then both append mode and write mode will do the exact same thing. But when you have a file with data in it, an append mode will put the data at the end, and the write mode will erase everything in the file and start over. So is everyone clear about the difference between append mode and write mode? Okay. So next up we have files and folders. Sometimes it is required to read and write into multiple files that are present in a directory or subdirectory. With the current knowledge, we will write the path of every file and perform the operation for each of them. What to do in case there are hundreds of folders or thousands of files inside of them. So Python provides us an easy way to iterate the folders and subfolders in a path using library OS. So we can import this library into Python and we can actually use it. So importing the library before using the functions. So we use import keyword and then the OS is the name of the library. So we write import OS and that will help us use this library and its functions. So we have os.walk. So what this will do is it will iterate through all the files and folders in a directory, including subdirectory and subfolder. So if you do for root folders files in os.walk, so when you do os.walk, these are the three things that will be returned to you. And you can print these out and it will give you various information. So let's try and using this in a directory that we can view. We will go back to PyCharm for this. Okay, so we have import OS. So every time we're using a function from the OS library, this is an important line to write. Without this, the function will not work. So what we're going to do next is um, we're going to be using for root files folders. Sorry, it's folders and files. Always be sure to know what the correct chronology is. You don't need to memorize it, but you can always refer to the slides when necessary. So you do os.walk, and then inside we can make it tilde. So a tilde represents root folder that will go into my root directory, correct? So when we do this, we can do print. Okay, so let's try running this. Um, hmm. So nothing seems to be happening. So instead of doing this, let me try. um, Okay, so let's just copy this from over here, right? So we have this directory over here, right? So let's copy this. So you can do this in yours as well if you want. And let's try to see everything in the PyCharm projects folder. Okay, so it gives us everything that is inside this folder. As this is a lot of information, let's try using a folder that will be a little smaller than this. So let's try seeing everything inside this Python class 3 folder. So we have everything over here, as you can view on the left. I can annotate it. So let's try running the code now. All right, so we still get a large amount of information. This is because it still goes into the very root of the folder. So if we go to the very top, it gives us venv, which is this folder, right? And .idea folder. Now this .idea folder must be a folder that is present in the other category. So we have example.txt and main.py in this, right? This is the Python class 3 folder. Then we go into the venv folder, which is this folder right over here. We can see there's bin and library inside it. So we can see that for each and everything, it gives us the individual information in each and every folder. So this will be something that you can try on your own, and it will become more clear what I'm trying to say here, because for your personal computer, it will show your personal files that are present in that very folder. If you have any doubts about how you can find your information, I can tell you about that as well. So if you want to find out where a particular document is located on a Windows operating system, you want to right click on it and click properties. And in that, you should have the root directory of your file present in there. Is everyone a little clear on what we are trying to do when we do os.walk? It goes through each and everything in this folder and gives you more information about the root, the folders in that folder, and the files in that folder. Okay, so let's move on to the other screen, back to our PowerPoint. So OS can also be used to check if the path exists to a particular file, right? So as we can see, we wrote a name called path is equal to Sorry, I don't know how that keeps happening. So path is equal to C slash random path, and this path is something that doesn't exist. When we try to check for it, it says incorrect directory because we checked is if os.path exists, then you do this, else you do this. So as it doesn't exist, it doesn't go into this if statement, but it goes into this else and gives us this incorrect directory answer. Another important example you can see on the left is file path, and then you can see this very long file path that is over here. And also we are checking, is this a file path? So is file, if this is true, and if the size of this file is greater than 0, then we can say, oh, file is not empty. Otherwise, we can check if the file is just invalid, or is it valid but it is empty. So these are things that you can, these are pieces of code that you can run on your own at home. But basically, all you need to know is that the function, the os path exists function, is used to check if a particular path exists. Then the os path dot is file, this is file. If this exists, if this path does exist, is it a file? If it's a file, this will be true, otherwise false. Then we can check is if that file is empty. So if we do get size, and we can check if that size is greater than 0. If the size is greater than 0, then the file is not empty, otherwise it will be empty. This can also be negative in some very rare cases, but that is when the file is actually invalid or it is otherwise corrupted. So is everyone clear on what these three functions are doing? Or do we need to see examples in PyCharm perhaps? If you need an example, I can switch over and we can do some examples for this. Okay, let's do an example. So we will leave import OS in here because we want to check this. Sorry, we need to use some functions from OS. So let's see. We have um, not typing. Okay. So let's check if OS dot path dot is also exists. Let's try this functionality first. So here we can do, let me just copy this. Okay. Oh, actually, let's put this in a variable. Let's call it path. Then we will print yes, else, print no. Okay, so does anybody want to take a guess about what will happen when we try to run this code? Just by reading it, even if you don't know the answer, even if it's wrong, that's fine. Just a guess. So it will print yes. So that is indeed correct. So when we try to run this code, we will get yes. This is because the example.txt file does exist. It is in the Python class 3 folder. And we can see that this is the root for that, which is the value that we have over here as well, right? So this tilde over here stands for this root directory, right? That is where all of our PyCharm projects, or at least my PyCharm projects, are being saved. So now let's try to make it a little different. What if I do example2.txt? Will this change the answer that we get? What will we get? Yes or no as the answer? Okay, so we will get no. Okay, so let's try running this code. And yes, we do get a no. This is because example2 is not a file that exists in this folder, right? All right, so let's try doing something a little different. What if we do this? What will be the answer now? So we have two yeses in chat. Let's try to see what the answer will be. So it says yes. This is because this is indeed a folder that exists, right? venv is inside Python class 3 and so on. So what if I change the function I'm using to is file? What about now? What do you think the answer will be? We have a no in chat. We have a yes, no. I'm not sure. Okay, that so you're unsure. No, yes. Okay, so we have a few different answers. Let's try to see what will happen. And it says no. This is because while this path does exist, it is not a file, and this function checks whatever is in here if it is a file or not. And we can see venv, even though it contains files itself, it is not a file. Instead, if we did uh, sorry, example.txt, now if we run this is a yes. This is because this path is indeed a file. It exists and it is a file. So is everyone clear on what is file does and the difference between exists and is file? Okay, so we also have the third function, which is get size. So for using the get size function, what we're going to do is we're going to use the example.txt file again. And excuse me. Yeah, so when we try to run this piece of code, what do you think will happen? This is the example.txt file for if you want to look at it. So we have a yes in chat. Let's try to run it. And that is indeed the answer. It is yes. because the file is not empty. It does have something inside it. That is why it prints out yes. So what if we remove everything in this file and we save it? Now when we run this, it gives us a no because the file is now empty and the size is not greater than 0. Similarly, if we give it a folder, it will also say, it says yes because the folder does contain some things. So this will give you the size of both a folder and a file. So this is not a way, this will not help you check whether something is a file or not. You will have to perform that check first. Then you can check whether that file is empty or not. Is everyone clear on why we can't use get size to see if something is a file or not? Okay, so let's move back to the presentation. It's nice to see that somebody else also joined in. We have, so another good thing to look over here is that there's the use of R over here. So if you're using single inverted commas, you might have to use the R keyword before it to allow backslashes to be a part of the string. Even if you're using double inverted commas, it is good practice to put an R when you're using Python to denotate that this is a file path and might contain backslashes. So we have the replace functionality. So what if we need to replace a string with another and create a new file? So we can use replace, and open can be used in a single line using with loop to read and write at the same time. I am line 1 with incorrect spelling of Python. I am line 2 with same mistake in spelling of Python, but this time in middle. Oh, so we have with open. So we open it in read mode as file input object, and we also open it in write mode. So what this does is when we open it in read mode, that file becomes cached and it will be used by this file object as it was untouched, right? And this will do the same exact thing for the write as well. So when you do for line in file input object, right, they have been put in the same exact object, so they're reading and writing at the same time. So you can do both. So you can do correct line is equal to line dot replace python with python, which is the correct spelling, file output object dot write correct line. So the input object, that was what we're reading, we're looping through each line in that, and then for each line we replace it, we replace python with python. The replace function does that. And then when we do file output object, this is what we were writing into, so we can do write that line back there. So what write does is it completely erases the file and then we start over, so it will write those two corrected lines again. So let's try to see an example of this in PyCharm. So let's write here something here first, line 1, line 2. Okay, so we have over here with open example.txt, and we open this in read mode first, and we can give it the name file in, and then we can put a comma here and do another open statement. We open the same exact file, example.txt. Okay, so now we will first do for line in file in. So what this does is it loops through each line in the file, right? So for each line, what we want to do is we want to make a new line. Let's call it R line. R stands for replace, and we do line dot replace. Let's say we want to replace line with oh, sentence, right? And then we do file out dot write, because this is the file we opened in write mode. We can write the line back out. So R line. When we run this piece of code, it will not give us any output in the console, but now the example file has been changed. So only exited, it only erased everything. It didn't put any lines in. So let's try to figure out what went wrong. So we open the file with a write, and we opened it again with file out for line and file in. Hmm. Okay, so we'll come back to this later on. I will email you about why this code is not seem to be working. Oh yes, you're correct. So I made a very rookie mistake and I didn't import OS. Um, I'm not sure if that is what went wrong, but we can give it a shot. So, oh wait, we don't have anything inside this again. So let's write this, save it, run it again, and it still deletes everything. Hmm. Open correct example. Okay, so what I just realized is that we can't open the same file at the same time with two at the same time. We can't open it at two places at the same time. So what instead we're going to do is we're going to create a new file with this name. So we can open two files simultaneously. I am very sorry for the confusion over there. Let's try to run this code. And oh, this was empty. Let's do this again. Okay, so now when we see this file, it is the same file but with these strings replaced. So basically why we couldn't open this file uh, two times is because once we opened it in read mode, and as soon as we opened it in write mode, what happened was it wiped the file, because write mode wipes the file completely, right? What we possibly could do is we could take this out and write append over here and try running this. So what this will do is it will append to the end. So you can append and read at the same time, but you can't read and write at the same time. Is that clear on why I made that mistake. I can repeat why that file got wiped as soon as we tried to read and write at the same time. But basically, what happens is as soon as you open a file in write mode, it will wipe the contents of that file completely. You need not even write something in it before it wipes it. So, moving on to the next part of the lecture. So that was all for today. We have some extra links over here which you can look at to complete your assignment as well. And you have some practice questions as always. And if there's any more doubts, feel free to ask them in chat or unmute yourself. But otherwise, you're free to head out and I will stop recording.